A quick word on this week's sponsor, Aura. Aura are dedicated to protecting you and your family from online threats. I received an email a few months ago from a company that I trusted, announcing that they had been involved in a data breach, and my personal information was at risk. This was alarming and made me aware of the vulnerability of my data. Unfortunately, this is becoming more and more common. The National Public Data Breach in 2024 exposed the personal information of millions of people. If cybercriminals get hold of your personal data, they could target you through identity theft, fraud, and they could even open new credit accounts in your name. Aura will monitor your personal data across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records to alert you about potential identity theft. Every adult on the account, up to 5, gets $1 million in identity theft insurance to cover eligible losses and fees, with a total of up to $5 million in coverage. They provide you with all-in-one protection across multiple devices. They also help remove your personal information from data brokers and people search sites that can sell your information to identity thieves and scammers, and you'll get a VPN service, password manager, and antivirus for your devices. Aura will never sell your data to third parties. I get this all-in-one app at an affordable price. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches and brokers, and if you don't want to either, you can click the link in the description or go to aura.com/operations to try 2 weeks for free. That will be more than enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Rushing inside the perimeter, the US Green Berets and Marines jostle around in their heavy MRAPs. The 5 vehicles move up behind the sand berm that forms the main American fighting position. The Delta Force operators, Rangers, and their Kurdish partners, ears still ringing from the massive artillery bombardment, greet the reinforcements and haul the fresh ammo and supplies from the armoured trucks. Fixed on the thermal imaging displays of the MRAP's remote weapon systems, the gunners search the open desert between the Conoco refinery and the town of Khasham. Clear as day, the signatures of armed men appear white-hot against the cool night, Russian Wagner Mercenaries and their Syrian allies. Rallying to face the next attack, approximately 40 American forces and their allies, the rebel Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces Group, or SDF, prepare to defend themselves. Green Berets bring the remote weapon stations to bear. The long barrels of the 50 caliber machine guns point accusingly at the approaching fighters. Along the berm, the dismounted special forces ready their light machine guns and javelin missiles. The Green Beret sergeant, known only as Chauncey, keys the radio. Let's open up and let them know we're here. Through January 2018, US surveillance assets observe hundreds of Syrian soldiers and dozens of armoured vehicles steadily amassing in the city of Deir ez-Zor. The bulk of this force is assessed to be elements of the Syrian 4th Armoured Division, but US signals intelligence intercepts radio traffic that is unmistakably in Russian. The Russian Wagner Mercenary Group has played a considerable role in aiding pro-Assad forces, providing leadership, advising, and often participating directly in combat. US Central Command uses the deconfliction phone line with Russia to discuss the build-up, but the Russian armed forces claim to know nothing of the operation. With the group we aren't allowed to mention on YouTube, henceforth referred to as Organisation ICE, largely defeated in the region, the eyes of Assad's government in Damascus turned to securing Syria's former wealth. Traditionally, oil and natural gas reserves were a cornerstone of the Syrian economy. Syria has been negotiating with Kurdish leaders for access to these oil fields, but to no avail. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the now late leader of the Wagner Group, tells Syrian officials that he has approval from an unnamed minister in the Russian government to conduct an offensive to improve Assad's situation. Their objective is the Kurdish-held Conoco natural gas refinery just over the agreed demarcation line between Kurdish and Syrian territory. The Conoco plant is held by a small Kurdish force, supported by an advisory team from the US 75th Ranger Regiment. Suspicious of the Syrian and Wagner build-up, US Central Command moves a team of Delta Force operators to the plant to assess the threat, bringing the garrison to around 30 Americans. The nearest Allied ground forces are a detachment of US Army Special Forces and a platoon of US Marines, occupying a mission support site around 20 miles away near Al-Suwar. At 5 AM on the morning of the 7th of February 2018, US forces watch as a large group of 250 Syrian fighters cross a pontoon bridge over the Euphrates towards Kurdish territory. After a warning shot is fired by US forces, the Syrians, largely from the 4th Division and tribal militias, withdraw back across the bridge. Later, at 3 PM, Syrian and Wagner forces begin to move up towards another crossing point to the north. As the hours tick by, US forces watch as they steadily move across the Euphrates as darkness falls. CENTCOM places US air assets in the Middle East on alert. The Green Berets and Marines at the mission support site prepare to act as a quick reaction force and pack their MRAPs with additional ammunition, thermal imagers, medical supplies and food. A Black Hawk arrives shortly after, bringing blood and more medical equipment to treat any casualties. As night falls, the Syrian and Wagner forces settle into the villages of Khasham and Tabiyeh. The Russian mercenaries are under no illusion that they will be facing American forces as well as Kurdish forces, who the Syrian and Russian sources habitually claim are Organisation ICE. Wagner fighters allege that their officers are given a final briefing by Russian Ministry of Defense personnel, who promise both air defense and close air support from a pair of Su-35 flankers. At 8:30 PM, they move to their start line, marked by the railway that skirts the edge of Khasham. Syrian troops from the 4th Division, Iranian-backed tribal militias and Wagner Group mercenaries mingle as they form into columns on the edge of the village. Like most militaries, boredom is the most common emotion, and one Wagnerite knocks on the hatch of a Syrian T-62, looking for food. The hatch swings open, and he is met with a wave of fragrant smoke, either from tobacco or other substances. A hand emerges from the swirling murk with a Syrian off-brand Snickers bar. Orbiting above, a US Air Force MQ-9 UAV watches the build-up, streaming its video back to the JSOC team at the refinery. They watch as over the next 2 hours, Syrian and Wagner artillery crews practice loading shells and sighting their guns, and a platoon of T-72s snakes up to the small settlement, less than a mile from the American position. At 10:30 PM in the dead of night, all hell breaks loose. The thunder of howitzers announces the Syrian attack. 122mm shells rain down on the US and Kurdish outpost. Wagner mortars bombard the coalition fighting position, and the forward T-72s open up, the crack of their 125mm guns completing the destructive symphony. Kurdish fighters and Delta Force operators brave the withering hail of shellfire and take cover behind the protective sand berm around the refinery and inside the armoured hides of their MRAPs. Springing into action, the airmen operating the orbiting MQ-9 Reaper flip their master arm switch to on and begin stalking the battlefield, searching for artillery. 20 miles away, the Green Berets and Marines at the mission support site scramble aboard their MATVs and MRAPs, load their weapons and move out, a Kurdish truck following. The going is slow as the quick reaction force is blacked out, driving with their night vision goggles, and having to snake through the sandberms and roadblocks obstructing the road. As they push on through the night, US Central Command and the Pentagon urgently raise their Russian counterparts. US signals intelligence is still hearing Russian voices in the radio traffic around Khasham. Complicating the American response further, Russia's long-range S-400 surface-to-air missile system is active, causing CENTCOM to hold its responding aircraft back in case the Russian air defense forces are supporting the attack. While back-channel diplomacy continues, the MQ-9 crew smashes 4 of the Syrian and Wagner howitzers with Hellfire missiles. The US Special Forces reply as best they can at such range with light machine guns and Javelin anti-tank missiles. From the village of Tabiyeh, a pair of BM-21 Grads open fire. No sooner has their barrage started, it is cut short by a salvo of GPS-guided HIMARS rockets from distant Marine Corps artillery, called in by the American Special Forces. At around 1 AM, the Green Berets and Marines arrive near the refinery, and are awed by the sight of shells bursting around the US and Kurdish positions, and the burning traces from anti-aircraft guns employed in direct fire, flicking over the buildings and sandburns. The sight is more than enough for the driver of the Kurdish truck, who about turns and speeds off. Chauncey muses that he is the smartest man on the battlefield. As the torrent of Russian and Syrian shells subsides, the Delta Force commander guides the QRF inside the refinery grounds with his infrared laser. In quick order, the Green Berets and Marines position their MATVs online behind the sandberm, between the fresh shell craters scarring the American line. Most of the MRAPs are armed with a 50 caliber Browning M2, fitted to a remote weapon system with thermal imaging capability. These weapons will allow the Americans to deny the open ground between them and Khasham. Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns rasp again, spitting deadly but inaccurate streams of 23mm high-explosive rounds over the Americans' heads. Wagner has only just started. Through their thermals, the operators manning the 50 cals watch as groups of white silhouettes advance towards them across the sand. These men are clearly the forward element of the combined Wagner and Syrian assault, and evidently believe the Americans to be suppressed. The remote weapon systems slew onto targets, gunners laze to find their range, and, upon Chauncey's order, open fire. The M2 Brownings explode to life, chattering steadily as they pour bursts of lead into the oncoming fighters. The leading Syrian soldiers crumple under the brutal weight of fire. Dug in forward of Khasham, the rest of the Syrian force replies. A torrent of heavy machine gun fire, RPGs, and other heavy weapons showers the American fighting position. What the Syrian shooting lacks in accuracy, it makes up for in volume. The special forces give as good as they get. The ensemble of 50 cals keeps up the punishment, rhythmically hammering out rounds to past 2 kilometers, substantially over its usual effective range. Marines dart between the MRAPs, rushing more ammo to the ravenous machine guns. Green Berets dodge incoming fire and 23mm shells to frantically reload the big ammunition drums of the 50 cals. Along the burn, Delta operators and Rangers salvo javelins at distant Russian and Syrian positions, striking a handful of vehicles. Russian officials on the other end of the hotline disavow the Wagner force entirely and power down the S-400 system in Latakia. The United States informs the Russians that they are going to take action, and the Russians do not object. Aviation forces are now on the way. The beleaguered defenders of the Conoco refinery just need to survive until help arrives. Team Sergeant Chauncey is working in the back of his MATV, drawing up the team's next move, as the vehicle's interior reverberates with the din of the Browning barking angrily on the mount above them. One of his Green Berets calls in, "Hey, I got eyes on these really big vehicles." At first they are hard to identify, but 10 blobs of heat soon sharpen to the distinctive shape of main battle tanks. A company of 10 tanks are leading a new attack, along with Syrian militants from Tabiyeh. Trying their luck, Chauncey directs the other Green Beret to engage the lead vehicle. The other MRAP obliges with a burst of 50 caliber fire. The rounds arc lazily towards the T-72, and either ricochet or shatter uselessly against the thick armour plate. The company of Syrian tanks continues forward, closing the distance to less than 2 kilometers. It appears that the American Special Forces have expended all of their Javelin anti-tank missiles. Their only salvation now can be air support. But the Green Beret team leader, known as Andrew, is unable to raise any support on the radio. Nonetheless, he knows they have to keep fighting. Keep shooting and marking anything armour with traitors for when the aircraft check in. Lacking thermal sights or modern night vision, the 4th Armoured Division's T-72s advance closer still, the bright orange shots of their 125mm guns briefly illuminating the darkness. HE frag rounds tear overhead. The unnerving crack and the pressure wave of the supersonic rounds remind them how exposed they and their thinly armoured MATVs are. The gunners keep hammering away with their 50 cals, trails of tracer rounds suppressing any accompanying infantry and peppering the oncoming T-72s, now practically at spitting distance, less than 1,000 metres away and showing no sign of stopping. One Green Beret reflects, "Everything that we've accomplished, and this is where everything ends, against Russian mercenaries with tanks, not even the enemy that we came to fight. We had to make peace with the possibility of not making it back, but it was easier to swallow knowing we were defending our friends and doing what needed to be done." The lead tank erupts in a ball of flame and exploding ammunition. The bewildered Special Forces operators look up to see their saviours. From the north, 4 AH-64E Apache attack helicopters sweep over the refinery, slinging another hellfire into another T-72. Rolling into a bank over the desert, the lead Apache opens up with its 30mm cannon. A withering hail of high-explosive shells crackles across the Wagner and Syrian fighting positions. As the first pair thunders around to re-attack, the second pair pours on the fire, hitting tanks and fighting positions with Hellfires and laser-guided APKWS rockets. One Wagner fighter describes the aerial barrage as a merry-go-round with heavy-caliber machine guns. But as the tide turns, the operators at the refinery receive more grave news from the officers manning the watch stations at US Central Command. "Just be advised, incoming bomber," the American command center warns. "Roger," team leader Andrew replies. "No dude, Russian bomber inbound." Andrew passes this stark warning on to his men, as he envisions their position being obliterated by 500-pound bombs. There is little they can do but get in their vehicles and brace for impact. On the edge of Khasham, in front of the buildings, a Wagner column sits, waiting to advance. The mercenaries sitting on top of tanks and lighter vehicles hear the rumble of jet aircraft above, and morale grows. Ours have arrived, the Wagnerites guess. They are made known of their error, as the lead vehicle in the column is vaporized. F-15 Strike Eagles of the 336th Fighter Squadron, the Rocketeers, have arrived. Knowing what's coming, the infantry scatter. A 500-pound JDAM smashes into the T-72 at the rear of the column, throwing off the main battle tank's turret. With the lead and rear vehicles knocked out, the Gaz trucks and BRDM-2 armoured cars trapped in between are destroyed one after another. Despite the still raging firefight between the American Special Forces, the Syrians, and their Wagner allies, an Air Force tactical air controller stands on the berm, exposing himself to enemy fire to direct the incoming air support. The aircrew circling above can hear him running out of breath from vectoring so many strikes in quick succession. The Apaches keep up the barrage, cutting down the Syrian fighters that attempt to flee back to Khasham and Tabiyeh. Russian Air Force Su-30 SM flankers are actually en route towards Deir ez-Zor. It is not known if they have orders to engage, but they choose to keep their distance. Aside from the F-15Es pounding the Syrian and Wagner forces, there is another threat. Unbeknownst to anyone on the ground, a flight of F-22 Raptors are perched high above the battlefield, stealthily watching the Russian fighters, AMRAAM missiles at the ready. After an hour of punishment, the devastated Syrian and Wagner forces receive the order for a general retreat. The dismounted infantry flees back across the railway line through Khasham. They avoid friendly tanks and vehicles, realizing that they only serve to draw American bombs. More aircraft arrive on station. Wagner Mercenaries hear the drone of turboprops and realizes what lurks above them. An 80-130 Whiskey Stinger II takes over from the orbiting Apaches. In its dark and crowded cargo bay, weapons operators load the first of many shells into the breech of its 105mm cannon and let fly. The powerful high-explosive rounds collapse the buildings where the Syrian and Wagner troops are taking cover. Now, a B-52 Stratofortress tops off the aerial armada. Upgraded since its original specifications, B-52Hs no longer carpet bomb enemy positions, but instead linger for hours at high altitudes, acting like an orbital battle station, steadily dispensing its massive arsenal of laser and GPS-guided bombs onto targets throughout the battle. Syrian tank crews break into buildings to try and hide from the bombardment. An ammunition warehouse is set ablaze, and any vehicles in the open are destroyed. Thoroughly beaten, the Wagner and Syrian fighters make the nearly 6-kilometre escape to the crossing over the Euphrates, stopping briefly only to shelter from incoming bombs and shellfire. Using the deconfliction line, Russian authorities negotiate a ceasefire with US forces by 4 AM. Despite reporting in the immediate aftermath of the battle, it is unlikely that 200 Wagner fighters were killed. The United States estimates that between 200 to 300 of the 500-strong force were killed, though most of these casualties will have been soldiers of the Syrian Army's 4th Division and tribal militias. Estimates of Wagner Group casualties range between 20 and 80 killed depending on the source. Regardless of the numbers, losses were heavy enough for the group to commission a memorial commemorating the defeat. No American personnel are harmed, and only one Kurdish SDF fighter is injured. One of the survivors is the T-62 crew that handed the Wagner fighter the Snickers bar. With a faulty radio, and in their own world of music and smoke, they did not realise that there was a battle raging for over an hour. Upon realising, they flee, only to be found 2 days later in another village. Speaking to the US Senate Armed Services Committee on the 26th of April 2018, then Secretary of Defense James Mattis summarised the Battle of Khasham for the assembled senators. The Russian High Command in Syria assured us it was not their people, and my direction to the chairman was the force then was to be annihilated, and it was. Thanks again to our amazing patrons whose support enables us to make these videos. Thank you to all our new patrons who joined recently, and a special thanks to our patron of the week, Damien Deck. Each week we choose our favourite Patreon comments to shout out. This week Rob Crocker says, "I called for it to be annihilated and it was a spectacular line to utter." If you'd like to support us to keep making these videos, please join our Patreon at patreon.com/the operations room and get access to exclusive benefits such as early access to videos, ad and sponsor free. We would love to have you as part of our community and really appreciate your support.